Hi, I'm Rachel Davis. For 13 years, I stirred love into every pot, seasoned every dish with devotion, and served my heart on a platter to a family that saw me as nothing more than hired help. I thought feeding them meant they'd finally accept me. Instead, my husband found someone else whose cooking he preferred. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra. Special for you. The woman who stole my marriage didn't just take my man. She took my recipes, my traditions, and even my signature apple pie. But here's what they didn't count on. When you've been invisible for over a decade, you learn how to see everything. And what I saw will change everything. The smell of rosemary and garlic still clung to my apron as I stood in my kitchen, staring at the evidence spread across my granite countertop like pieces of a shattered life. 13 years of marriage, 13 years of Sunday dinners, holiday, feasts, birthday cakes, and anniversary meals, all of it reduced to screenshots on Mark's phone that I'd accidentally discovered while looking for our shared grocery list. The photos weren't of my food, they were of hers. Ashley Young, 28 years old, food blogger, Instagram influencer, and apparently the woman my husband had been visiting every Tuesday evening under the guise of working late at Henderson and Associates. The woman whose homemade pasta he'd been praising in text messages. The woman whose chocolate soufflé had earned heart-eye emojis I hadn't seen from him in years. The woman who was now cooking for my husband while I spent every weekend preparing elaborate meals for his family, still believing I was building something that mattered. I scrolled through the messages with trembling fingers, each one a knife twist in my chest. Ashley's carbonara was incredible tonight. You'd love her technique. Can't wait to try that braised lamb recipe you mentioned. Your presentation is getting so much better. Rachel could learn a thing or two. The last one hit me like a slap. My own husband, comparing me to his girlfriend, finding me lacking in the one area where I'd poured my entire identity for over a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me. Food had brought us together. I'd met Mark at a cooking class in downtown Springfield, both of us fumbling through knife skills and laughing at our disasters. He'd said my laugh was the best seasoning he'd ever tasted. On our first date, I'd made him my grandmother's famous pot roast, and he'd claimed it was better than anything his mother had ever cooked. That should have been my first warning. In the Davis family, nobody surpassed Patricia Davis in the kitchen. Nobody was supposed to anyway. From the moment Mark brought me home to meet his family, the battle lines were drawn with measuring spoons and mixing bowls. Patricia Davis ruled her kitchen like a general commanding troops, and I was the foreign invader threatening her territory. Her Sunday dinners were legendary in their social circle, perfectly arranged tables, courses timed to the minute, and a matriarch who accepted compliments like tribute. When Mark announced we were engaged, she smiled with her mouth, but her eyes promised war. The first Sunday dinner after our engagement, I'd offered to bring dessert. Patricia had smiled that sharp smile and said, "Oh, honey, I wouldn't want you to stress yourself. We have very particular tastes." Mark had squeezed my hand under the table and whispered, "Don't take it personally. She's protective of family, traditions." But I heard what she really meant. You don't belong here, and you never will. I should have listened. Instead, I declared war with whipped cream and good intentions. For 13 years, I fought that war in my kitchen every weekend. I studied Patricia's techniques like a spy gathering intelligence, memorizing her timing, her ingredients, her presentation. I practiced her recipes until my fingers could prepare them in my sleep, then slowly, carefully, I began to improve them. I added fresh herbs to her bland potato salad. I swapped processed cheese for artisanal varieties in her famous casseroles. I introduced spices that didn't exist in her repertoire, cumin, cardamom, sumac, until her grandchildren started asking for Aunt Rachel's version instead of Grandma's. Each small victory felt like acceptance, like finally earning my place at their table. When Patricia grudgingly admitted my green bean almondine was adequate, I practically floated home. When Mark's brother David asked for my secret to the perfect prime rib, I thought I'd finally won. When their youngest grandchild, Emily, started calling me the best cook ever, I believed I'd found my family. I was wrong about everything. The YO Sunday dinners became my obsession, my art, my identity. Every Saturday, I'd spend hours at the farmer's market, selecting the perfect ingredients. I'd plan menus like military campaigns, considering everyone's preferences, dietary restrictions, and seasonal availability. I transformed my kitchen into a professional workspace, investing in commercial-grade equipment, specialty tools, and ingredients that cost more than some people's monthly grocery budgets. Mark's family began to expect miracles. Not just good food, but Instagram-worthy presentations, multiple course meals, dietary accommodations for every whim, and the emotional labor of making everyone feel special and included. Patricia stopped cooking for family gatherings entirely, delegating everything to me with the casual entitlement of a queen commanding servants. "Rachel will handle the appetizers," she'd announce. "Rachel always makes the most beautiful centerpieces. Rachel doesn't mind staying late to clean up. She loves taking care of everyone." I did love it, or I convinced myself I did. Every compliment felt like validation, every successful dinner party like proof of my worth. I measured my value in plates cleaned, recipes requested, and the satisfied sighs of people pushing back from my table. I told myself this was what marriage looked like: sacrifice, service, earning your place through acts of love. Mark encouraged it, of course. Why wouldn't he? He got to be the hero who married the woman who made his family's lives easier and more delicious. He never questioned why I spent my entire weekends cooking for people who barely acknowledged my existence outside the kitchen. He never noticed that conversations stopped when I entered rooms, that invitations to family events came through him like I was his +1 rather than his wife. He never seemed to care that his family treated me like highly skilled domestic help rather than their daughter-in-law. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October, 3 weeks before what would become our final Thanksgiving together. Mark had texted that he'd be working late again, the 4th Tuesday that month. I'd planned to surprise him with his favorite comfort meal, beer-braised short ribs with creamy polenta and roasted vegetables. I'd even bought the expensive craft beer he loved, the one that cost $12 a bottle because I wanted everything to be perfect when he came home stressed from another long day at the office. But Mark's phone, charging on the kitchen counter while he showered, had other plans for my evening. A notification lit up the screen. "Ashley, can't wait to see you tonight. I'm trying that duck confit recipe we talked about." Then another. "Your feedback on my plating made such a difference. You really get my vision." My hands moved without conscious thought, swiping to read more. The conversation stretched back months, a parallel universe where my husband discussed food with another woman the way he once talked with me. They shared cooking videos, restaurant recommendations, and inside jokes about technique and presentation. She sent him photos of her meals like love letters, and he responded with enthusiasm I hadn't seen from him in years. But it was the video that shattered everything. A short clip of Ashley plating some elaborate dish, her hands moving with practiced grace while Mark's voice could be heard from behind the camera. "That's my girl. You're going to be famous one day." The casual intimacy in his tone, the pride, the affection, everything I'd been trying to earn through perfect meals and selfless service, he was freely giving to someone else. I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by ingredients for a meal one would eat, and realized I'd been cooking my way into slavery. Every perfect dinner had been another link in chains I'd forged myself. Every family gathering where I'd worked while others relaxed. Every holiday where I'd sacrificed my own enjoyment to ensure everyone else's comfort. Every Sunday where I'd smiled through backhanded compliments and subtle dismissals, all of it. Had been training Mark's family to see me as convenient rather than cherished. The short ribs were still in the oven when Mark emerged from his shower, humming and checking his appearance in the hallway mirror. He looked happy, energetic, younger, somehow, the way he used to look when we were dating and he was excited to see me. "Smells amazing in here," he called, walking into the kitchen with the casual confidence of a man whose dinner was always ready, whose life was always organized by invisible hands. "You're the best, Rach. Don't know what I'd do without you." The casual dismissal in that compliment, reducing 13 years of marriage to convenient food service, was what finally broke something inside me. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting from sitting on the hard tile, and looked at my husband like I was seeing him for the first time. "Actually," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "you're about to find out." Mark paused in the act of loosening his tie, confusion flickering across his features. "What do you mean?" I walked to the counter where his phone still lay face up, Ashley's messages glowing like accusations. I turned the screen toward him and watched his face transform from confusion to panic to something that might have been shame if I'd believed. He was capable of it. "I mean," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded, "that I know where you really spend your Tuesday evenings. And I know exactly what kind of feedback you've been giving Ashley on her plating techniques." The kitchen fell silent except for the timer on the oven, counting down the minutes until dinner would be ready. Perfect timing, as always. Just like I'd trained myself to be for 13 years, accommodating everyone else's schedule while my own life ticked away unnoticed. Mark's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Rachel, I can explain." "I'm sure you can," I interrupted, and for the first time in our marriage, I didn't apologize for cutting him off. "I'm sure you have a very reasonable explanation for why you've been having dinner dates with a food blogger while I've been cooking for your family every weekend. I'm sure you can explain why you're more excited about her duck confit than anything I've made in the past year. I'm sure you can justify why you told her she was your girl while your actual wife was at home preparing your favorite meal." The oven timer chose that moment to sound, its shrill beeping filling the kitchen like an alarm. I turned off the timer but left the short ribs inside. Let them burn. Let everything burn. For 13 years, I'd been setting timers and checking temperatures and ensuring everything was perfect. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Tonight, perfection could go to hell. "It's not what you think," Mark said, the most predictable lie in the cheating husband handbook. "Ashley and we're just friends. She's been helping me plan something special for you." I laughed, a sound so bitter it surprised us both. "Something special for me? Like what, Mark? Divorce papers?" Because that's the only surprise that would make sense at this point. "Rachel, please. You're overreacting. Let me explain what's really happening." "What's really happening," I said, walking past him toward the staircase, "is that your wife is done cooking for people who see her as a convenience rather than a person. What's really happening is that I'm finally hungry for something you can't provide." I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at him one more time. He stood in the kitchen I'd transformed into a shrine to his family's appetites, surrounded by the evidence of my devotion, the expensive appliances, the carefully organized spice rack, the meal I'd prepared with love he'd been giving to someone else. "Oh, and Mark?" I added. "You might want to call your mother and let her know that Sunday dinner is canceled. Permanently. She can figure out how to feed her own family for the first time in 13 years. I climbed the stairs with legs that felt stronger than they had in months, leaving behind the smell of rosemary and garlic and the sound of Mark calling my name. For the first time since our wedding day, I walked away from a meal I'd prepared, and it felt like the most nourishing thing I'd done in years. Behind me, the oven continued heating the short ribs I'd never serve, in the kitchen where I'd lost myself one perfect meal at a time. But ahead of me lay something I hadn't tasted in 13 years. The possibility of feeding my own hunger instead of everyone else's. The breaking point had finally arrived, and it tasted like freedom. The guest bedroom felt foreign under my touch, like a hotel room I'd never bothered to personalize. I pulled my grandmother's old suitcase from the closet, the one with faded travel stickers from places I'd dreamed of visiting but never had time for because someone always needed dinner prepared. My hands shook as I folded clothes I'd bought years ago but rarely wore. The bright colors Mark said were too loud. The flowing fabrics his mother claimed were impractical for kitchen work. The house creaked around me with the weight of 13 years, each sound a memory I no longer wanted to carry. Downstairs, I could hear Mark pacing the kitchen, his footsteps echoing against the tile I'd scrubbed countless times. Occasionally, his voice would drift up as he talked to someone on the phone, probably Ashley, probably spinning some story about his unreasonable wife who'd discovered their little cooking arrangement. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding a dress I'd bought for our last anniversary, a celebration that had consisted of dinner at his mother's house because Patricia had insisted on hosting. Mark had barely looked at me that night, too busy complimenting his mother's dry chicken and overcooked vegetables, while I smiled and pretended not to notice that my own husband couldn't even see me anymore. The memories came flooding back like a broken dam, each one sharper and more painful than I'd allowed myself to acknowledge at the time. Our second anniversary, when I'd planned an intimate dinner at home, complete with candles and wine, only to have Mark invite his entire family, because Mom was feeling lonely. Our fifth anniversary, when I'd suggested a weekend getaway, and Mark had countered with hosting his company's annual barbecue because you're so much better at this than anyone else would be. Every milestone had been hijacked, every romantic gesture redirected into service for others. I'd convinced myself it was compromise, that marriage meant putting family first. I'd told myself that feeding people was my love language, that nurturing others through food was my special gift. But, sitting in that guest bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life I'd never really lived, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't been loving anyone. I'd been disappearing. The sound of Mark's footsteps on the stairs made my chest tighten. He knocked softly on the door, a courtesy he'd never extended in our shared bedroom. "Rachel, can we talk?" "We are talking," I replied, not bothering to look up from my packing. "Through a door. It feels appropriate." "Please, I know how this looks, but you don't understand the whole situation." I laughed, a sound that held no humor. "The whole situation? Mark, I understand perfectly. You've been having an affair with a food blogger while I've been cooking for your family every weekend. You've been complimenting her technique while criticizing mine. You've been building a relationship around the one thing I thought we shared. What part of that am I misunderstanding?" The door handle turned slowly, and Mark peered in like he was entering a crime scene. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and for a moment he looked like the man I'd fallen in love with 14 years ago. Vulnerable, uncertain, human. Then he opened his mouth. "It's not an affair, Rachel. Ashley and I, we're working on something together. A business opportunity. I was going to surprise you." I continued folding clothes with mechanical precision, each movement a small act of rebellion against the chaos he was trying to create. "A business opportunity that requires you to lie about working late? That involves intimate dinner dates and personal cooking sessions? That includes you calling her your girl while she films herself plating food?" Mark's face flushed, and I knew I'd hit the mark. "You don't understand how business works in the food industry. Networking requires—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than I'd intended, and Mark actually stepped back. "Just stop lying. To me, to yourself, to whoever you called downstairs. I saw the messages, Mark. I saw the way you talk to her, the way you encourage her, the way you see her. When was the last time you looked at me like that? When was the last time you cared about anything I cooked beyond whether it would impress your family?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mark stared at the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and I realized he couldn't answer because he couldn't remember. Neither could I. I've been invisible for years, I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. I've been the ghost who makes perfect meals appear, who anticipates everyone's needs, who sacrifices her own desires so everyone else can be comfortable. I thought if I just tried harder, cooked better, gave more, eventually someone would see. Me. But the harder I tried, the more invisible I became. Mark looked up then, and for a moment I saw something that might have been regret in his eyes. Rachel, you're not invisible. You're the most important person in my life. Our life. Everything we've built. Everything we've built is a lie, I interrupted. A beautiful, delicious lie that I've been serving on fine china for 13 years. But I'm done being the cook in my own life, Mark. I'm done being the supporting character in a story where everyone else gets to be the hero. I closed the suitcase with a decisive click and stood up, surprised by how steady my legs felt. For so long, I'd imagined this moment would devastate me, that leaving would feel like losing everything that mattered. Instead, it felt like finally winning something worth having, myself. Where will you go? Mark asked, and there was something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. Fear, maybe. Or the first glimmer of understanding about what he was about to lose. I don't know, I admitted. For the first time in 13 years, I have no idea what I'm going to make for dinner tonight, and it feels wonderful. I walked past him toward the door, carrying my suitcase and a small bag of personal items. At the threshold, I paused and looked back at the man I'd married, the man I'd fed and nurtured and loved until I'd forgotten how to feed myself. You know what the saddest part is, Mark? I'm actually an incredible cook. Not because your mother taught me, not because I read the right blogs or used the right techniques, but because I cook with love. Real love. The kind that sees people for who they are, not who they can be useful as. Ashley might be able to make pretty plates for your Instagram, but she'll never understand what it means to nourish someone's soul. Mark's face crumpled slightly, and he reached toward me. Then stay. Show me that kind of love again. Teach me how to see you. I shook my head, feeling surprisingly peaceful. I can't teach you how to see me, Mark. I'm done trying to earn basic respect and affection. I'm done auditioning for a role in my own life. If you want to learn how to love someone properly, you'll have to figure that out on your own. The drive to Carol's house took 20 minutes, but it felt like traveling through decades. I passed the farmer's market where I'd spent every Saturday morning for 13 years, searching for the perfect ingredients to win over people who would never truly accept me. I drove by the specialty kitchen store where I'd registered for wedding gifts, dreaming of the meals I'd prepare for the family I was joining. Every landmark of my married life looked different now, smaller somehow, like props in a play I'd finally decided to stop performing. Carol answered her door before I could knock, her face soft with concern and something else. Relief, maybe, that I'd finally taken the step she'd been gently encouraging for years. She wrapped me in a hug that smelled like vanilla and coffee, scents that belonged to her own life rather than someone else's expectations. I've been wondering when you'd show up here, she said, taking my suitcase without being asked. The guest room's ready. It has been for months. Carol had been my college roommate, my maid of honor, and the only person who'd consistently seen through the elaborate performance of my marriage. She'd watched me transform from a vibrant woman with dreams of opening my own catering business into someone who cooked elaborate meals for people who barely thanked her. She'd bitten her tongue through years of my stories about Patricia's backhanded compliments and Mark's casual dismissal of my contributions. She'd been waiting for this moment almost as long as I had. How long have you known? I asked, settling into her familiar kitchen where mismatched dishes and cluttered counters somehow felt more welcoming than my picture-perfect showroom at home. About Mark's affair? I suspected something was off when you stopped talking about food with joy. You used to light up when you described a new recipe or a successful dinner party. Lately, you've sounded like you were reporting on a job you hated but couldn't quit. Carol poured 2 generous glasses of wine and sat across from me at her worn wooden table. About the deeper problem? Honey, I've known for years that you were drowning. Every time you'd call to tell me about another family gathering where you cooked all day and cleaned all night while everyone else relaxed, I wanted to drive over there and shake some sense into all of them. Why didn't you say something? Because you weren't ready to hear it. And because sometimes people need to save themselves. I could have told you 1,000 times that Mark's family was using you, that Mark was taking you for granted, that you deserved better. But until you felt it in your bones, until you chose yourself over their approval, nothing I said would have mattered. I sipped the wine, tasting it fully for the first time in years, instead of rushing through it to get back to kitchen duties. I feel like I've wasted 13 years of my life. You didn't waste them, Carol said firmly. You learned things about loyalty, about service, about what happens when you give everything and expect nothing in return. Those aren't wasted. Lessons, even if they came at a high price. The question now is what you're going to do with that knowledge. That evening, Carol ordered Chinese takeout, and we ate it straight from the containers while sitting on her couch in pajamas. It was the first meal in years that I hadn't planned, prepared, or cleaned up after, and the freedom felt intoxicating. We talked late into the night about dreams I'd abandoned, places I'd wanted to travel, books I'd wanted to read, hobbies I'd given up to make more time for cooking elaborate meals for people who saw them as obligatory rather than gifts. Do you remember your business plan? Carol asked. The catering company you wanted to start? You had it all figured out. The specialty in farm-to-table cuisine, the focus on intimate gatherings, the dream of cooking for people who actually appreciated good food. I did remember vaguely, like recalling a dream from another lifetime. Rainbow Harvest Catering. I was going to focus on seasonal menus and sustainable ingredients. I wanted to make food that told stories, that brought people together instead of just filling them up. What happened to that dream? I closed my eyes, remembering. Mark said it was too risky. His mother said it was selfish to start a business when I could be focusing on family. They convinced me that cooking for the Davis clan was practice, that I was building skills I'd use later when the time was right. Except the time was never right, and the skills I built were all about pleasing critics instead of following my own vision. It's not too late, Carol said quietly. You're 41, not 91. You have years of experience, a reputation for incredible food, and for the first time in over a decade, you have something even more valuable: the freedom to cook for people who actually want what you're offering. That night, lying in Carol's guest bed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine a life where I cooked because I wanted to, not because someone expected me to. A life where I could experiment with flavors and techniques because they excited me, not because they might finally earn approval from people determined to withhold it. A life where my worth wasn't measured in clean plates and satisfied customers, but in my own joy and creativity. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. The house feels empty without you. Come home and we'll figure this out. Then another. Mom wants to know if you're planning the Christmas menu yet. I told her you're just taking some time to think. I turned the phone face down and pulled Carol's soft quilt up to my chin. For the first time in 13 years, no one's dinner was my responsibility. No one's Christmas menu was my problem. No one's satisfaction was my burden to carry. The emptiness Mark felt in that house was the space I used to occupy, the ghost of a woman who'd served everyone but herself. Tomorrow I would start learning how to fill a different kind of space, the one inside myself that had been starving while I fed everyone else. Tonight, I would sleep without setting an alarm for early morning prep, without planning tomorrow's meals, without carrying the weight of other people's expectations. The hunger I felt now wasn't for food. It was for a life where I could finally taste my own cooking with the appreciation it deserved, where I could nourish my own dreams instead of serving everyone else's. And for the first time in years, that. Hunger felt like hope. 3 weeks passed before they came crawling back, and when they did, it wasn't with apologies. It was with demands wrapped in false urgency and painted with the kind of manipulation I'd been swallowing for over a decade. I was in Carol's kitchen, actually enjoying the process of cooking for the first time in months, when my phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen like a warning. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what excuse she'd crafted for the radio silence that had followed my departure. "Rachel, darling." Patricia's voice dripped with the kind of artificial sweetness she reserved for moments when she needed something. "I hope you're feeling better after your little break. Mark explained that you've been overwhelmed lately, and we completely understand. Marriage can be so stressful, especially when you're trying so hard to please everyone." The immediate gaslighting shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. In Patricia's version of events, I hadn't discovered my husband's affair and finally stood up for myself. I'd simply had a breakdown from trying too hard to be perfect. The narrative rewrite was masterful in its audacity. "Hello, Patricia," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I'm doing very well, thank you." "Oh, wonderful, I'm so glad to hear it. Now, I hate to bother you during your recovery time, but we have a situation here that really requires your expertise." Of course they did. I stirred the risotto I was making for Carol and myself, a simple mushroom dish that I was preparing because I wanted to, not because anyone expected it. The luxury of cooking without agenda felt revolutionary. "What kind of situation?" I asked, though I could already predict the answer. "Well, you know how important this year's Thanksgiving is. It's David's first holiday since the promotion, and we have some very important clients coming. Mark mentioned you'd been feeling neglected, so I thought this would be the perfect opportunity for you to shine again. Show everyone what you're truly capable of." The manipulation was textbook Patricia. Reframe my abandonment as her generous gift, my absence as my loss rather than their inconvenience. But there was something else in her voice, a tightness that suggested panic beneath the performance. "I see," I said. "And what exactly are you proposing?" "Nothing too elaborate. Of course, just your usual magic. The turkey with that special herb rub you do, the stuffing with the wild mushrooms, those dinner rolls that David's clients raved about last year, and perhaps that cranberry sauce with the port reduction. You know how much everyone loves that." I listened to her recite my own recipes back to me like she was ordering from a restaurant menu, each dish a memory of hours spent in service to people who'd never once thanked me properly. The audacity was breathtaking. After 3 weeks of silence, after Mark's affair, after years of treating me like hired help, she was calling to place her usual order. "That does sound like a lot of work for someone who's been having a breakdown," I observed. Patricia laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Oh, you know how much you love these challenges. And honestly, Rachel, we've tried to manage without you, but nothing tastes quite right. Mark attempted the dinner rolls last weekend, and they were absolutely inedible. We need you, darling." There it was. The admission I'd been waiting 13 years to hear, delivered not as an apology or acknowledgement of my worth, but as a simple statement of their dependence. They needed me, but only for what I could provide, not for who I was. "I'm curious," I said, adding another ladle of warm stock to my risotto. "What has Mark been telling you about why I left?" "Well, he said you'd been stressed about the holidays, feeling pressure to make everything perfect. He mentioned you'd been emotional lately, probably hormonal changes. You know how that can affect women our age. He said you just needed some space to remember how much you love taking care of family." The creative fiction was impressive. In Mark's version, I wasn't a betrayed wife who'd discovered his affair. I was just a stressed housewife having a midlife crisis, overwhelmed by my own perfectionism. My legitimate anger had been transformed into female hysteria, my boundary setting reframed as temporary confusion. "How interesting," I said. And what did Mark tell you about Ashley? The silence on the other end stretched long enough for me to add another cup of stock to my risotto. When Patricia finally spoke, her voice had lost some of its confident sweetness. Ashley? I'm not sure I know who you mean. Ashley Young, the food blogger Mark's been spending his Tuesday evenings with, the one he's been teaching to plate properly while I've been cooking for your family every weekend. Another pause, shorter this time. When Patricia spoke again, I could hear the wheels turning, the rapid recalculation of strategy that came when her preferred narrative met inconvenient facts. Oh, that Ashley. Yes, Mark mentioned she was helping him plan a surprise for you. Something about a cooking class, I think. You know how thoughtful he can be. The lie rolled off her tongue so smoothly I almost admired the craftsmanship. Patricia had absorbed Mark's story and improved on it, adding details that painted him as a devoted husband planning romantic gestures rather than a cheating spouse caught in the act. A cooking class, I repeated. How thoughtful indeed. Exactly. See, I knew you'd understand once you thought about it rationally. Mark loves you so much, Rachel. We all do. You're such an important part of this family. The emotional manipulation hit all the familiar notes: love, family, belonging, the suggestion that questioning their behavior was irrational. For 13 years, this combination had been my kryptonite, the magic words that convinced me to swallow my hurt and return to service. Patricia, I said, turning off the heat under my risotto and giving it one final stir. I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Of course, darling. In 13 years of marriage, can you name one thing you've done to make me feel welcome in your family? One gesture that wasn't about what I could provide for you? The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat. Rachel, I think you're being a bit unfair. We've always treated you like family. No, I said quietly. You've treated me like staff. Good staff, reliable staff, staff you were fond of, but staff nonetheless. And when I finally stopped showing up for work, you didn't ask if I was okay or what you could do to help. You called to place your Thanksgiving order. That's not. Rachel, you're clearly still upset. Why don't you come over this evening? And we can talk about this properly? I'll make tea, and we can clear up these misunderstandings. The offer was delivered in the tone she used with unruly grandchildren, suggesting that a little maternal attention would fix whatever was broken, in my thinking. But I heard what she really meant. Come back to the house where you've always been outnumbered, where the familiar dynamics will take over, where you'll remember your place and return to it willingly. I appreciate the offer, I said. But I don't think there's any misunderstanding. You need someone to cook your Thanksgiving dinner, and I no longer do that job. But Rachel? Patricia, I'm going to give you some free advice. Learn to cook for your own family. After 13 years of delegating that responsibility to me, it might be time to remember what it feels like to serve people you love. I hung up before she could respond, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. The risotto sat in the pan, perfectly creamy and ready to serve, a meal I'd made for the pure joy of creating something beautiful. Carol walked in just as I was plating our dinner, her eyebrows raised in question. Let me guess, the Davis family has discovered they can't actually feed themselves? Thanksgiving emergency, I confirmed, setting down 2 plates of the most perfect risotto I'd ever made. Apparently, Mark's dinner roll attempt was absolutely inedible, and they need me to save the holiday. Carol picked up her fork and took a bite, closing her eyes in appreciation. This is incredible, Rach. When was the last time you made something this good for yourself? I honestly can't remember. I tasted my own cooking, really tasted it, without worrying about whether it would meet someone else's standards or earn someone else's approval. The flavors were complex, balanced, personal, nothing like the crowd-pleasing dishes I'd perfected for the Davis family palate. Are you tempted? Carol asked. To go back and save their Thanksgiving? I considered the question seriously. 3 weeks ago, the answer would have been an automatic yes. The thought of Patricia struggling in the kitchen, of David's important clients being disappointed, of Mark facing the consequences of his actions, all of it would have sent me rushing back to fix everything. No, I said, surprised by how easily the word came. I'm not their emergency contact anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Mom said you hung up on her. She's really hurt, Rachel. Can't we at least discuss Thanksgiving? I know things are complicated, but family is family. I showed the message to Carol, who snorted with disgust. Family is family. Where was that sentiment when he was having dinner dates with Ashley? Before I could respond, another text arrived. This one from Nicole, Mark's sister. Hi, Rachel. Hope you're doing okay. Mom mentioned you might not be available for Thanksgiving. I totally understand if you need a break, but I was wondering if you could at least share some of your recipes. I offered to help cook, but honestly, I have no idea where to start. Your sweet potato casserole recipe would be amazing if you have it handy. The casual entitlement was breathtaking. After 3 weeks of silence, Nicole was sliding into my text messages like we were old friends, asking for the recipes I'd perfected, through years of trial and error. No acknowledgement of the situation with Mark, no recognition of how I'd been treated, just a breezy request for my intellectual property delivered with emoji and exclamation points. Look at this, I said, handing Carol the phone. She read Nicole's message and shook her head. They really think you're just going to hand over 13 years of work because she asked nicely. Like your recipes are some kind of family heirloom. They're entitled to inherit. The recipes aren't even the point, I said. It's the assumption that I owe them my labor in whatever form they find convenient. If I won't show up to cook, I should at least provide the instructions so someone else can do a cheaper version of my work. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was David, Mark's brother. Hey, Rachel, heard you and Mark are working through some stuff. Totally get it. Marriage is hard. Quick question, though. Any chance you could prep a few things in advance for Thanksgiving? I know it's a lot to ask, but these clients are really important for my career. I'd be happy to Venmo you for ingredients. And time? Let me know. Carol leaned over to read the message and laughed out loud. He wants to Venmo you? For Thanksgiving dinner? Like you're a catering service? In their minds, I always was, I realized. They just never paid me before. The messages kept coming throughout the evening, each one more desperate than the last. Patricia called twice, leaving voicemails that progressed from maternal disappointment to barely veiled panic. Mark sent a series of texts ranging from guilt, "You're punishing the whole family for my mistakes," to bargaining, "What if I cook and you just supervise?" to anger, "This is childish, Rachel. People are counting on us." By 10 o'clock, I'd received messages from every adult member of the Davis family, including distant cousins I'd met twice, and Mark's grandfather, who apparently had been enlisted, to remind me of my duty as a wife and daughter-in-law. The full court press was impressive in its coordination, if pathetic in its desperation. They're acting like Thanksgiving is a hostage situation, and you're the only one who knows how to defuse the bomb, Carol observed. Because that's exactly how they see it, I said. They've spent 13 years training everyone to expect miracles from my kitchen. They've built their reputation as hosts on my work, promised their guests experiences I would deliver, structured their entire holiday, tradition around food I would prepare. Now they're facing the possibility of exposure, that their perfect family dinners were only perfect because of someone they never truly valued. The final message of the night came from Ashley Young herself. I stared at her name on my screen for a long moment before opening it. Hi, Rachel. Mark gave me your number. I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I know this situation is complicated, but I wanted you to know that Mark talks about your cooking all the time. He's so proud of your skills. I'm actually a huge fan of your style. I've been trying to learn some of your techniques. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime. I think we have more in common than you might expect. The audacity was so complete it took my breath away. Ashley wanted to grab coffee, to bond over our shared appreciation for food, to pretend we were potential friends rather than women whose lives had been entangled by her affair with my husband. She wanted to pick my brain about techniques while she picked apart my marriage, to learn my secrets while keeping her own. I set the phone aside and looked at Carol, who was staring at me with something between amazement and horror. "She wants to be friends," I said. "She wants your recipes," Carol corrected, "and your approval. And probably your blessing for whatever she's building with Mark. She wants to turn you into a collaborator in your own betrayal." You know what the strangest part is? A month ago, I would have seriously considered it. I would have convinced myself that being the bigger person meant helping them, that showing grace meant making their lives easier at my own expense. I would have found a way to make their happiness my responsibility. And now? I picked up my phone and typed a response to Ashley. "I don't think coffee would be appropriate, but I appreciate the thought. I hope you understand." Then I scrolled through all the messages from the Davis family, reading 13 years of accumulated entitlement and manipulation condensed into a single evening's panic. Finally, I composed one message and sent it to the family group chat I'd been removed from weeks earlier. "I understand you're concerned about Thanksgiving dinner. I want to be clear that I won't be cooking for the Davis family this year or any year going forward. I wish you the best in your holiday preparations. Please don't contact me about recipes, cooking advice, or meal planning. I'm sure you'll figure it out." Then I blocked every single one of their numbers and turned off my phone. "How does it feel?" Carol asked. I considered the question, checking in with my body and emotions the way I'd learned to check the doneness of a roast. There was relief, definitely. Fear, too, the kind that comes with burning bridges you'd spent years building. But underneath it all was something I'd almost forgotten how to recognize: excitement. "It feels like the first day of my real life," I said. The revenge arrived on a silver platter, literally, at exactly 6:30 on Thanksgiving evening. I hadn't planned it this way. When I'd accepted Janet Morrison's invitation to cater her intimate Thanksgiving gathering, I'd simply been grateful for the opportunity to cook professionally again, to remember what it felt like to create food for people who genuinely appreciated artistry over obligation. Janet was a local food critic who'd been following my work for years through the Davis family's social media posts, though she'd never known I was the invisible woman behind their celebrated dinner parties. "I've been trying to figure out how to reach you for months," Janet had explained when she called a week after my final message to the Davis family. "Patricia Davis has been bragging about her family's cook for years, but she always made it sound like some hired help. I had no idea it was her daughter-in-law creating those incredible meals." The opportunity felt like destiny. Janet wanted an elegant Thanksgiving dinner for 12, focusing on elevated comfort food with unexpected twists. She gave me complete creative control, a generous budget, and something I'd never experienced in 13 years of cooking for the Davis family: genuine excitement about what I might create. I spent days planning a menu that represented everything I'd learned about food and everything I'd dreamed of creating when I wasn't bound by Patricia's bland tastes and traditional expectations. Heritage turkey with maple bourbon glaze, wild mushroom bread pudding instead of conventional stuffing, roasted root vegetables with brown butter and sage, cranberry gastrique with pomegranate and thyme, pumpkin creme brulee with ginger snap tuile, cookies. Every dish was a love letter to the cook I'd always wanted to be, the artist who'd been buried under years of people-pleasing and family diplomacy. As I worked in Janet's spacious kitchen, I felt my hands remember movements I'd forgotten, my palate recall flavors I'd abandoned in favor of safe, familiar choices. The other guests began arriving at 5, and I could hear their appreciation drifting back to the kitchen as they sampled the appetizers I'd prepared. Real appreciation, Not the polite acknowledgement I'd grown accustomed to, but genuine delight and curiosity about techniques and flavor combinations. It was intoxicating. "The chef absolutely must meet our guests," Janet insisted around 6:15, practically dragging me out of the kitchen despite my protestations that I needed to finish plating the dessert course. "They're all food lovers, and they're completely enchanted by what you've created." I followed her into the dining room, still wearing my apron and carrying the confidence that comes from knowing you've created something extraordinary. The guests were scattered around Janet's living room, wine glasses in hand, talking animatedly about the meal they'd just experienced. That's when I saw them. Mark and Ashley sat on Janet's cream-colored sofa, looking like the perfect couple they'd apparently become since my departure. Ashley wore a flowing burgundy dress that photographed beautifully, and she was holding court with a small group of guests, explaining some complicated technique for tempering chocolate, while Mark gazed at her with the adoring expression I remembered from our early dating days. They hadn't seen me yet, too engrossed in Ashley's performance to notice the kitchen door opening. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, before I realized what was happening. Janet's dinner party wasn't just any gathering. It was Springfield's monthly foodie salon, an exclusive group that rotated between members' homes to showcase local culinary talent. Of course, Ashley would be here. Of course, Mark would be her date. "Everyone," Janet announced, her voice carrying across the room, "I'd like you to meet the extraordinary chef responsible for tonight's meal. This is Rachel Davis, and I have a feeling you're going to be hearing a lot more about her in the culinary world." The room turned toward me with collective interest, and I watched Mark's face transform from contentment to shock, to something approaching horror. Ashley's explanation of chocolate tempering died mid-sentence as she followed his gaze, her perfectly composed expression flickering with confusion and something that might have been fear. "Rachel," Mark said, half rising, from the sofa, like he might flee. "What are you doing here?" "Cooking," I replied simply, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Something I'm apparently quite good at when I'm not trying to please people who can't be pleased. The room had gone quiet, the kind of expectant silence that falls when people sense drama but don't yet understand the players. Janet looked between Mark and me with growing comprehension, her journalist instincts clearly engaged. "You two know each other?" she asked. "Rachel is my wife," Mark said, the word coming out like an admission of guilt. "Soon-to-be ex-wife," I corrected, enjoying the way Ashley's face went pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Mark, I'd like you to meet Janet Morrison, food critic for the Springfield Tribune. Janet, this is my husband and his girlfriend, Ashley Young." The silence that followed was delicious, richer and more satisfying than any sauce I'd ever created. I watched Ashley process the introduction, understanding dawning in her eyes as she realized she was sitting in a room full of food industry professionals who now knew exactly who she was and what she'd done. "Girlfriend?" Ashley said, her voice pitched higher than normal. "That's not—" "Mark, you said you were separated. You said the divorce was already—" "We are separated," Mark interrupted quickly, shooting me a look that pleaded for discretion. "Rachel moved out weeks ago. We're working through the details." "Actually," I said, pulling out my phone and scrolling to my recent calls, "we're not working through anything. I filed for divorce yesterday. My lawyer should be serving you the papers tomorrow, but since you're here, I can give you a preview of what to expect." I'd spent the morning with Tom Martinez, the divorce attorney Carol had recommended, and the conversation had been more satisfying than any meal I'd ever prepared. Tom had listened to my story with the calm professionalism of someone who'd seen every variation of marital betrayal, and he'd outlined a strategy that would ensure I received everything I was entitled to after 13 years of unpaid domestic labor. "You documented everything?" Tom had asked, reviewing the financial records I'd brought. 13 years of receipts for grocery shopping, kitchen equipment, entertaining expenses, all paid for with my inheritance from my grandmother, plus detailed records of every family gathering I catered, every holiday meal I prepared, every special occasion I orchestrated. I treated it like a business because that's essentially what it was. Tom had smiled, the expression of a lawyer who'd just been handed a winning case. Your grandmother's inheritance was separate property that you converted to marital assets through home improvements and family entertaining. You're going to be able to claim significant compensation for unpaid domestic services, especially given the scale and frequency of the entertaining you provided. Now, standing in Janet's living room with Mark's panicked eyes fixed on my face, I felt the power of that legal backing like armor. The house, by the way, I continued conversationally, will need to be sold. My lawyer says I'm entitled to half the proceeds, plus compensation for the kitchen renovation I funded with my grandmother's inheritance. Apparently, creating a professional-grade cooking space that increased the property value by 30% entitles me to quite a substantial settlement. Mark's face had gone ashen. Rachel, we don't need to discuss this here. Oh, but I think we do, I said, warming to the topic. You see, Ashley, my soon-to-be ex-husband has been telling people that I was just a housewife who got a little overwhelmed by domestic duties. But the truth is, I was running an unpaid catering business out of our home for 13 years, generating significant value for his family's social and professional standing. I turned to address Janet and the other guests, who were watching the drama unfold with rapt attention. Mark's mother, Patricia, built her reputation as a hostess entirely on meals I planned, prepared, and served. She's been taking credit for my recipes at charity functions and social gatherings for over a decade. Mark's brother David has been landing major clients by inviting them to family dinners, where I provided restaurant-quality cuisine for free. Ashley looked like she might be sick. Mark, you told me Rachel didn't really cook anymore. You said she'd lost interest in food. I had lost interest, I admitted, in cooking for people who saw my work as their entitlement rather than my gift. But as you can see from tonight's menu, my passion for food is alive and well when I'm cooking for people who actually appreciate artistry. One of Janet's guests, a woman I recognized as the owner of Springfield's most exclusive restaurant, stepped forward. You created tonight's meal. The maple bourbon glaze technique alone was extraordinary. Where did you train? Nowhere formally, I said. I'm entirely self-taught, which makes my professional prospects quite exciting. Apparently, there's significant demand for a chef who can create this level of cuisine without the overhead of culinary school debt. Mark found his voice again, desperation making it crack slightly. Rachel, please, can we talk about this privately? I don't think so, I said. Privacy is what allowed this situation to develop in the first place. Ashley, I'm curious about something. Has Mark been teaching you any of my recipes? The carbonara technique he complimented in your messages, for instance. Ashley's composure finally cracked completely. Messages? What messages? The ones where he called you his girl while critiquing your plating techniques. The ones where he compared your cooking to mine and found me lacking. The ones I discovered the night I finally realized my marriage was over. Mark was standing. Now, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender or pleading. Rachel, you're making this sound worse than it is. Ashley and I were friends. Yes, we've gotten close, but nothing physical happened while we were still married. Nothing physical, I repeated, tasting the words like a wine that had turned to vinegar. Just emotional infidelity wrapped in cooking lessons. Just intimate. Dinners where you praised her creativity while taking mine for granted. Just a relationship built on the foundation of everything you claimed to value about me, but with someone young enough to be impressed by your attention. The room was riveted. Now, and I could see Janet mentally composing the article that would emerge from this evening. The food critic who'd discovered a hidden culinary talent through a public divorce confrontation It was the kind of story that launched careers and ended reputations. Ashley stood up abruptly, her wine glass shaking in her hand. I need to... Oh, I can't be here for this. Oh, but you should stay, I said sweetly. After all, you're about to inherit quite a project. Mark's family expects elaborate holiday meals, weekly Sunday dinners, and constant availability for last-minute entertaining. You'll need to learn to cook for 12 people minimum, accommodate multiple dietary restrictions, and smile graciously. While his mother criticizes your technique and suggests improvements, Ashley looked at Mark with something approaching horror. You never mentioned. I thought we'd just eat out. Patricia doesn't believe in eating out for family occasions, I explained helpfully. She considers it lazy and disrespectful. You'll need to master her traditional recipes while also innovating enough to keep everyone interested. It's quite the balancing act. I'm sure you'll figure it out eventually. Mark grabbed Ashley's arm as she moved toward the door. Ashley, wait. Don't listen to her. She's bitter about the divorce. It doesn't have to be like that for us. Ashley pulled free of his grip, her influencer mask finally dropping to reveal the young woman underneath, uncertain, overwhelmed, and clearly reconsidering her life choices. Mark, you told me your wife was a simple housewife who didn't understand your ambitions. You said she was holding you back from bigger things. This woman is obviously a professional-level chef, and she's talking about business partnerships and kitchen renovations and family obligations I never signed up for. She's exaggerating, Mark said desperately. My family's not that demanding. I laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. Ashley, let me give you one piece of free advice. Ask Mark to cook you dinner tomorrow night. From scratch, no takeout, no restaurant delivery. Ask him to prepare something that would impress your Instagram followers. Then imagine doing that every single weekend for 13 years, plus holidays, plus any time his family decides they want to entertain. Ashley stared at Mark like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. You can't cook, she said slowly. That risotto you made for me last week. You ordered it from Marcello's and just plated it differently. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a burned dinner. Mark's face confirmed what his words couldn't deny, and I felt a satisfaction deeper than any perfectly risen soufflé. Well, Janet said into the silence, this has been the most entertaining dinner party I've hosted in years. Rachel, I believe several of my guests would like to discuss potential catering opportunities with you. I looked around the room at faces that held respect, curiosity, and professional interest. Everything I'd been seeking in all the wrong places for 13 years. These people saw me as a chef, an artist, a professional worth knowing. Not as an unpaid servant or a convenient solution to their domestic needs. I'd be delighted to discuss opportunities, I said. Though I should mention that my rates are significantly higher than what Mark's family was paying me. Which was nothing, Mark said bitterly. Rachel, you're acting like I forced you to cook for them. You loved doing it. I loved the idea of belonging, I corrected. I loved the fantasy that feeding people meant they cared about me. But I was wrong about what love looks like, and I was wrong about what I deserved in return for my devotion. Ashley had reached the front door, and Mark hesitated between following her and continuing to argue with me. The choice said everything about where his priorities lay, now that the comfortable arrangement we'd built was crumbling around him. Go ahead, I told him. Chase after her. Explain how your ex-wife is just a bitter woman who doesn't understand your vision for the future. Tell her about all the ways she's better than me, all the reasons you chose her instead. But remember, this moment, Mark, because someday she's going to ask you to prove your love through sacrifice instead of just words. And when that day comes, you'll finally understand what I gave up for you. Mark left without another word, and I watched through Janet's front window as he caught up with Ashley on the sidewalk, his body language pleading, her posture rigid with newfound understanding. Dramatic exits aside, Janet said, appearing beside me with a fresh glass of wine. That was the most honest conversation about marriage I've heard in years. and the food tonight was absolutely transcendent. I think you're about to discover what it feels like to be appreciated for exactly who you are. I accepted the wine and took a sip, tasting layers of complexity I'd never noticed when I was too worried about other people's needs to pay attention to my own pleasure. Around me, Janet's guests were buzzing with conversation about the meal, about my story, about opportunities they wanted to discuss. For the first time in 13 years, I was the center of attention, not because of what I could provide for others, but because of who I was and what I'd created. The difference tasted like freedom, and I savored every drop. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my own restaurant, watching the evening service unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd finally found her place in the world. Harvest Moon had opened 3 months ago in the renovated Victorian house on Elm Street, and we were already booked solid through the summer. The reviews called my food soulful, innovative, and the kind of cooking that makes you believe in love again. Food and Wine had featured us in their Rising Stars section, and yesterday I'd gotten a call from a cookbook publisher interested in my story. The dining room hummed with the particular energy that comes from people experiencing something special. Through the pass window, I could see couples sharing small plates with the kind of intimacy that only comes from food prepared with genuine care. Families laughed over dishes that brought back childhood memories while introducing new flavors. Solo diners sat at the chef's counter, watching my team work with the fascination that comes from witnessing true craft. This was what I'd been searching for in all those years of Sunday dinners and holiday feasts. The alchemy that happens when food becomes a bridge between hearts, when cooking stops being performance and becomes communion. Every plate that left my kitchen carried intention, creativity, and the kind of love that nourishes souls as well as bodies. "Chef," called Marcus, my sous chef, "Table 7 wants to send their compliments on the duck confit. They said it's the best they've had outside of France." I smiled, remembering the first time I'd attempted duck confit in Patricia's kitchen, only to have her declare it too rich for family dinner and suggest I stick to simpler proteins. That duck confit was now my signature dish, featured in every review and requested by food bloggers from 3 states away. The evening rush was winding down when I noticed a familiar face in the dining room. Carol sat at table 12 with a bottle of champagne and the biggest smile I'd seen from her in years. She'd become something of a regular, bringing different friends each week to show off her brilliant chef friend who'd finally found her calling. "You have to try the chocolate soufflé," I heard her telling her companion, a distinguished woman I didn't recognize. "Rachel makes it with espresso and a hint of cardamom. It's like eating a cloud that happens to be the most delicious thing you've ever tasted in your life." I was plating the last desserts of the evening when one of my servers approached with an unusual request. "Chef, there's a woman at table 8 who'd like to speak with you. She said she's from the Davis family. She seemed pretty nervous about it." My hands paused over the soufflé I was dusting with powdered sugar. In 6 months, none of them had contacted me directly. I'd heard through Springfield's efficient gossip network that Patricia had attempted to hire a professional caterer for Christmas and been shocked by the cost. I'd learned that David's important clients had been less impressed with the store-bought appetizers and catered main course than they'd been with my homemade feasts. The family's reputation as hosts had taken a significant hit, and word was they'd started declining invitations to potluck events rather than risk exposing their culinary limitations. Mark's marriage to Ashley had lasted exactly 2 months. Apparently, the reality of dating a man who expected restaurant-quality meals but couldn't boil water himself had worn thin quickly. Ashley had returned to food blogging with a notable absence of home-cooked content, focusing instead on restaurant reviews and store-bought meal hacks. Mark, according to Carol's sources, was living in a furnished apartment and surviving on delivery food and frozen dinners. "Did she give a name?" I asked. "Nicole. She said she used to be your sister-in-law." I finished plating the soufflé and handed it to Marcus. "Send this out to table 3 and tell Nicole I'll be with her in a few minutes." I took my time washing my hands, untying my apron, and checking my appearance in the small mirror by the back door. The woman who looked back at me bore little resemblance to the anxious people-pleaser who'd once measured her worth in clean plates and family approval. This woman had confidence in her eyes, purpose in her posture, and the quiet strength that comes from building something meaningful with your own hands. Nicole sat alone at a corner table, nursing a glass of wine and looking supremely uncomfortable. She'd lost weight since I'd last seen her, and there were stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there during the golden days when someone else handled all the family cooking. "Hello, Nicole," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "How did you find the meal?" She looked up with a start, as if she'd been lost in thought. "Rachel, hi. The food was incredible. Really. I mean, I knew you were talented, but this is a whole different level." "Thank you. What brings you to Harvest Moon tonight?" Nicole fidgeted with her napkin, and I could see her working up to whatever speech she'd rehearsed. "I wanted to apologize for everything. For how we treated you, for taking you for granted, for not seeing how much you were doing for all of us." The apology hung between us like an offering I wasn't sure I wanted to accept. After 13 years of being invisible, after months of rebuilding my life from scratch, after finally finding success on my own terms, Nicole's regret felt both too little and too late. "I appreciate that," I said carefully. "What made you realize you wanted to apologize?" Nicole laughed, a sound edged with bitterness. "Christmas was a disaster. Complete, unmitigated disaster. Mom tried to recreate your turkey recipe from memory and turned it into leather. I attempted the stuffing and somehow made it both soggy and burnt. David ordered side dishes from 3 different restaurants, and nothing went together. The whole thing was so awful that Grandpa Joe actually got up and left halfway through dinner." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but something must have shown on my face because Nicole's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't realize," she continued. "We genuinely didn't understand what you were doing for us. We thought good food just happened, that family dinners just materialized because that's what families do. We had no idea how much work, how much skill, how much love went into every single meal you made. And now you do," I observed. "Now we're ordering pizza for Sunday dinner because none of us can cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. Now Mom's the laughingstock of her book club because she can't host anymore. Now David's career is suffering because he built his client relationships around dinner parties he can't actually throw. Now we realize that you were the reason our family functioned, and we treated you like you were lucky to be included." The tears were flowing freely now, and several other diners were glancing our way with concern. I handed Nicole my napkin, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy for the woman who'd once asked me to Venmo her my recipes. "Nicole," I said gently, "I understand that you're sorry, and I believe that you mean it. But I need you to understand something too. I didn't leave because I wanted an apology. I left because I needed to find out who I was when I wasn't trying to earn other people's love through service." She nodded, wiping her eyes with my napkin. "I know. And look what you built. This place is amazing, Rachel. The review in the Tribune called you a culinary genius. You're successful and independent and clearly much happier without us dragging you down." "I am happier," I agreed. "Because I'm finally cooking for people who appreciate food as art, not just fuel. Because I'm creating menus based on my vision, not someone else's limitations. Because I'm building something that belongs to me." Nicole was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wine glass like it might contain answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. Finally, she looked up with the expression of someone about to make a request they know they have no right to make. "Would you ever consider catering for us again, just occasionally for special events? We'd pay you properly this time, restaurant rates. We miss having beautiful food at family gatherings." The question hit me like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it revealed how little Nicole understood about what had really happened between us. Even now, even after acknowledging my talent and success, she was still seeing me as a service provider rather than a person who'd been harmed by their treatment. "Nicole," I said, keeping my voice calm, "imagine for a moment that you worked for 13 years at a company where your boss took credit for your projects, your coworkers ignored your contributions, and your salary was nothing but the privilege of being employed there. Then imagine that you finally quit and started your own successful company. How would you feel if that same boss called and asked if you'd like to do some freelance work for them?" The analogy landed with visible impact. Nicole's face crumpled as she finally understood what she was asking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't think. I just miss." "You miss the convenience," I said, not unkindly. "You miss having someone who cared enough about your happiness to sacrifice her own. But Nicole, that person was dying a little more every Sunday dinner. The woman who's sitting across from you, now the one who built this restaurant and this life, she only exists because I stopped trying to earn love through exhaustion." I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'm glad you enjoyed your meal tonight. I'm glad you've learned to value what I do. But I can't go backwards, not even for special occasions. This is who I am now, and this is where I belong." Nicole nodded, still crying softly. "I understand. And Rachel, I really am happy for you. You deserve all of this success. I just wish we'd realized that before we lost you." I walked away without responding, because there was nothing left to say. The damage hadn't been done in a moment of cruelty or a single betrayal. It had been accumulated over years of small dismissals, casual entitlement, and the gradual erosion of my worth until I'd almost forgotten it myself. Nicole's regret was genuine, but it couldn't undo 13 years of being invisible. Back in the kitchen, I found my team cleaning up with the efficient choreography that comes from working together toward a common goal. These people valued my leadership, learned from my techniques, and took pride in the food we created together. They saw me as a chef, a mentor, a business owner, all the things I'd always been but had never been recognized as. "Great service tonight, everyone," I called out as I tied my apron back on to help with the final cleanup. "The soufflés were perfect, Marcus. The sauce on the salmon was inspired, Jenny. And David, your timing on the appetizers was flawless." The genuine appreciation in their faces as they absorbed the compliments reminded me of everything I'd been missing in those years of cooking, for people who saw excellent food as their birthright, rather than a gift. This was what leadership looked like when it was based on respect rather than obligation, what appreciation felt like when it was earned through excellence rather than demanded through guilt. Later, after the last plate was washed and the kitchen was spotless, I walked through the empty dining room, turning off lights and checking that everything was ready for tomorrow's service. The silence felt peaceful rather than lonely, full of possibility instead of regret. My phone buzzed with a text from Carol. "Saw Nicole leave looking like she'd been crying. Everything okay?" I typed back, "Everything's perfect. She wanted to hire me for family events." Carol's response came immediately. "Please tell me you said no." I said no. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. "Proud of you? Coffee tomorrow to celebrate another successful evening?" "Can't wait." I locked the front door of Harvest Moon and walked to my car, breathing in the cool evening air that carried the scent of spring flowers and possibility. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who measured her worth in other people's satisfaction, who believed that love meant endless service without reciprocation. Tonight, I was a successful chef, a business owner, a woman who'd learned the difference between nourishing others and depleting herself. The drive home took me past the house Mark and I had shared, the one where I'd spent 13 years cooking elaborate meals for people who'd never truly seen me. The kitchen window was dark, and I wondered if whoever lived there now understood what that space had witnessed. The slow erosion of a woman's identity, the gradual transformation of passion into obligation, the years of love poured into dishes that were consumed without gratitude. My own apartment was small, but entirely mine, filled with cookbooks I'd chosen for my own education, equipped with tools I'd selected for my own creativity. The kitchen was barely large enough for one person, but it felt more spacious than the showroom I'd once commanded, because every inch of it belonged to me. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my tiny balcony, looking out over the city, lights and thinking about the dinner service I'd just completed. 28 dinners served, 28 opportunities to nourish people who'd chosen to trust me with their evening, their celebration, their hunger. Not a single obligation or expectation beyond excellence. Not a single moment of wondering if my efforts were appreciated. Tomorrow, I would prep vegetables for the weekend special, train my new line cook on the proper technique for my signature sauce, and meet with a food writer who wanted to feature Harvest Moon in a magazine article about women reshaping the restaurant industry. Next month, I would travel to Chicago to cook a guest dinner at a James Beard Award winner's restaurant. In the fall, I would teach a masterclass on seasonal cooking at the Culinary Institute that had offered me an adjunct position. All of it, built on the foundation of knowing my own worth, of refusing to accept crumbs when I deserved the whole feast. All of it possible because I'd finally learned the difference between feeding others and starving myself. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from an unknown number. "Hi, Rachel. This is Emma, the restaurant owner you met at Janet's dinner party. I know this is last minute, but I'm wondering if you'd be interested in collaborating on a pop-up dinner next month. I think our styles would complement each other beautifully." I smiled, remembering the conversation with Emma about the intersection of comfort food and fine dining, about the responsibility chefs have to both challenge and nurture their guests. This was the kind of opportunity that emerged when you stopped begging for scraps and started offering feasts. "I'd love to discuss it," I typed back. "Let's set up a tasting meeting." The response came quickly. "Perfect. Looking forward to creating something amazing together." Creating something amazing together. The phrase captured everything I'd learned about the difference between cooking from fear and cooking from joy, between seeking approval and building connections, between serving others and serving excellence. I finished my wine and headed inside, already thinking about tomorrow's prep list and next week's menu changes. In a few hours, I would wake up eager to get back to my kitchen, excited about the dishes I would create and the people I would nourish through food that came from my heart rather than my desperation. The woman who'd once measured her worth in clean plates had learned to measure it in her own satisfaction, her own growth, her own joy. And that transformation, like all the best recipes, had required patience, proper technique, and the courage to trust that the end result would be worth the risk. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.